For 19 years before I became a believer, and it was at this retreat in Atlanta. It's called, if any of you ever have the opportunity to go, it's called Healing for the Nations. Go to healingforthenations.org, and some of the material I actually presented on this weekend thus far actually came out of that retreat, and also came out of Robert McGee's Search for Significance. And the two people who lead that retreat, Rujan and Steve Morrison. So I don't know if I shared this with the whole group or just with my small group. Steve and Rujan Morrison, they're really good friends with Robert McGee. And so that's why they use a similar material when they go through the retreats. And it's this retreat where they basically say, we're going to give you the gospel again, but we're going to put it in language that you can understand it for the first time. And for me, that was a big deal, because I remember that first day, knowing that I spent $2,200 in travel costs and registration costs to fly all the way out to Atlanta to go to this retreat that a friend of mine had, through the World Christian Conference, she had recommended it to me. I did not want the money to go to waste, and when Rujan told me that, or told our group that she was going to be giving us the gospel, I was like, you gotta be joking me. I spent over $2,000 just to hear the gospel again. I could have flipped through the book of John, I would be okay. But then that's when she said, I will be giving it into words. She said, some of you may have heard it in a way that doesn't make sense. So we are going to make sure that when we give it to you, it will make complete sense. And I was thinking, really? Okay. So the whole premise of the retreat is that we have, everything is, life happens in situations, right? For example, I don't mean to point Cordelia out, she busted her leg open. Life happens in situations. It's how we respond to those situations. And the issue is that we respond to those situations out of a set of core beliefs, right? And if your core beliefs aren't lined up with God, how are you going to respond to God, or to respond to that situation? Fear, insecurity, in my case, anger, frustration, tempers. In my family, growing up, whoever yells the loudest, gets the last piece of bread, so to speak. So I learned that yelling got my way through life, sometimes in close family situations. But is that right? No, that's not right, because that's not the way how God would endeavor us to move in our lives. So knowing that something was not right, I went to this retreat. It's what they call a healing retreat. And going back to the core beliefs, when our core beliefs are incorrect, we call them strongholds, where we are listening, or we believe these false beliefs or these lies about ourselves. So for example, if I believe that I'm stupid, guess what? I'm going to go through school and keep on telling myself, no matter how much I study, I'm not going to be able to pull this off. And guess what? That chain that eventually marches in through your behavior. Remember that little chain I put on one of the slides? If you believe that you're a failure, you're not going to be successful, simply because you're living in that belief system. If you believe that you're burdened, for example, I believe that I was a burden to my family. What's that going to do? I'm going to have a broken relationship with my mom and dad. Okay, do you guys see where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's so important that our core beliefs are set in our lives, which is why the most important core belief is having value, understanding that you have value. Jesus has given you value. God has given you value. Well, for me, I heard that for the first time. And did I tell everybody what happened in my small group at the retreat? Do you guys remember? I don't know if I told you guys. So
yeah, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. So basically what happened was, Steve Morrison basically said, yeah, I think I told you. He said, Ben, I think what you want is unconditional love. I'm like, you crazy? I know what unconditional love is. I know it. But I didn't realize at that time I didn't believe it. And so what happened was that I had this imperfect picture of who God was. I believed that God's character was something else. And so the other part that I didn't tell you was there was a Korean girl in my small group. And so she had grown up with the same stuff that I had grown up with. And one of her issues was authority in church. And her authority was that coming from a Korean background, her pastors were very controlling, very heavy-handed, and did not shy away from handing out harsh discipline by basically in the means of rebuking you. If the pastor didn't feel you did something right or did something wrong, he would make sure that he would rebuke you. So that was her church growing up. So what he does, Steve Morrison's really good about painting pictures using objects, and so he had this gal stand on one side of this line, and he had another guy in our group standing on the other side. Let's see, I need a volunteer. I need a volunteer.
Robert. Right there.
Somebody.
You're right.
Somebody. Okay. All right. Okay. So you're going to be right here. Okay. There's a line right here. All right. And so you're basically in the role of the girl, and you have her background. And so I'm playing the place of God, and in her life, she'd been told, jump. Okay. And so, or she had been told, do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And here, what I'm doing in the picture of God, all I'm saying, like, hey, Robert, hold your hands out, I'll catch you. Stop right there. Stop right there. Okay, don't hold me. I'm not going to tell you to do it. My hands are just right here. This is an act of an invitation. If you hold my hands, you're going to be able to come over that line, and you're not going to fall through. Or it was more of a chasm, excuse me. I'm not going to tell you to jump. You choose whether or not you want to hold on to me, and you can come over because my hands are already out. It's an invitation. So that's the picture that we have. Jesus is always inviting us. He's not telling us. And that's when Steve Morrison, thank you. Steve Morrison was saying, he said, your picture of God is a God who is mean, who's always forcing something down your throat. That's why I'm not telling you to jump. I'm just putting my hands out. God's putting his hands out, and all you're doing is deciding whether or not you believe that he's going to hold your hands, he's going to grab onto you, and he's going to pull you through. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. That when you have an imperfect picture of who God is, guess what? Your core beliefs are all jacked up. Because basically you're saying, I believe that God is this, and this is a God who I'm going to follow. And when I heard that, that's when I decided, God, if this is who you are, I will follow you. But if this is not who you are, I made that, it was a decision at that point. I'm going to step away from my faith. Because if you think about it, who wants to follow a God who's mean, who's pushy, who's bossy? It's not, I mean, we talk about, well, God gave us commands in Psalm 119, about the law and stuff. We look at it as harsh, but you have to picture it from God, the loving Father. Those commands, those statutes, precepts, all the words that are used in Psalm 119, those are for our best interests. There's a difference in saying, I want you to do this just because I'm God, as opposed to, I'm asking you to do this because this is in your best interest. Like our parents asked us to go get an education because they know, in their eyes, it's in our best interest. That's love. And that's who God is. He is loving us through statutes, precepts, laws, whatever, because this will give you the abundant life. This will carry you through life. So I had to make a decision at that retreat whether or not I was going to follow God because he was who he said he was, who he said he was, or is, and will be, or God is a liar. That's at that point in my life, it was weird because I had never made my faith very binary, where it was either a 0 or a 1, like it was yes or no. And it was really scary, but I had to make that decision. It was, I'm either going to go home a non-believer, or I'm going to go home not just a believer, or not just a Christian, but a believer, a true follower of Christ. So that one night I sat there and I was thinking, and I was talking to Steve Morrison. I said, hey Steve, can you give me more? Can you give me more? And he said, Bun, it's very clear that you're gifted. You have a lot of giftings. But somewhere along the lines, you have taken that gifting and placed it in a bucket where, you've mixed everything up and you don't know what's from God and what's not from God anymore. He's like, I want you to take those giftings out of that bucket and be able to put it back in your life and saying, this is purely redeemed by God. It's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, those things are good because now you're thinking that like, oh, I have to follow God, I have to do all these things. Like, you're still missing the point. God is not asking you to throw all that stuff away. And so that night I actually made a decision, and I came and I just said, okay, God, if this, because one of their values in their handbook for their ministry is test God. Put God to the test. So it was at that point I decided, God, I will put you to the test. If you can show me over the next 48 hours that you say who you are, you have my life. Regardless of how much I sin, no matter how far I might fail, you've got my life. And as I start praying over the next couple of days, it dawned on me, if this is not true, I have basically wasted 19 years of my life. And if you really think about it, that's 19 years. I would have basically said, I mean, to put it in blunt terms, I would have completely invalidated my time in CCF. I would have completely invalidated my missions trips. It would have completely invalidated my 1-year trip in China. It would have completely invalidated my marriage. It would have completely invalidated my relationships with my pastors. Basically, I would be following a God who is a fraud. And so I made a very quick run through the scriptures. I said, God, if this is true, then it's got to be true. I don't know how else to put it. You're going to have to show up. And it was just very clear at that point when it dawned on me, the reason why I could get to the point of invalidating it simply was because I never believed that it was just the cross. It was the cross plus something else. I never believed that the work on the cross was just done for me, and that was it. Everything else we do in life, when we do things for God, yes, that's very important, but in some ways it pales in comparison. I think in some ways it's kind of secondary to the cross. And I'd been stuck in what they call the performance trap. I was trying to, when I talk about justification, for 19 years, all I was doing, I was trying to prove myself to God. I was trying to justify to God that my existence was worth it. When really all it was, Bun, there's the cross, done, go home. And that was so profound for me. I was like, okay, that has to be true because there's no way that, at this point, there's no way that can't be true because I don't know of any other religion, any other system that basically says it's just, I don't know anything else where I don't have to prove anything to someone. And when you think about it, if you don't have to prove anything to anybody, don't you feel safe and secure? Right? That's when I decided, God, if this is true, I want to be safe and secure. I want that safety and security. And once that night when I was falling asleep, I basically decided, okay, God, this is it. I'm going home as a believer. I'm not going home as a Christian anymore. I'm going to go home as a believer. Because as a believer, that means I'm telling the world, I believe in what you're saying. I'm not just a Christian. I believe in what you're saying. I'm following you. And so I kind of painted a picture of myself where I'm kind of an anal person. I do things a certain way. I'm very structured. I'm very systematic. I was even talking to, I don't know if Will is here, but I was even talking to Will about the messages. Like, hey, does it make sense? Is it lined up properly? I want to make sure, because I just tend to be really, really careful about a lot of things. And I was stuck in this performance trap where I was always doing the right thing. That's why I decided. So that sort of sets the background for the lake story. I decided right then at that point that I was going to do something really way out of whack, that something I would never normally do, but something when I told Edie what I was thinking of, she was like, I'm so proud of you. Because it's exactly what I would do. I'm like, yeah, that's what I figured. So I put on a lot of clothes. So where we were staying, it's called Red Top Mountain State Park in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, and there's this really big lake there with a pier and everything. So I put on some clothes. Not that I was naked or anything, so I put on some more clothes, and I ran down to the lake, and I took a fat, long, like 100-foot run. I ran off the pier and jumped in the lake with all my clothes on. And I remember the moment I hit the water, in the past, if I'd seen someone do that, I'd be like, that guy is so stupid. Why would you ruin your clothes and jump in the lake? Like, are you an idiot? You're going to have to go and wash your clothes, and life is going to be more difficult for you. And so here I was, jumping to the lake full of fish that were pecking at me from all over the place. It was a semi-stinky lake. And I remember the moment I came out of the water, normally if someone had shoved me in the water with all my clothes on, I'd be like, but I broke through the water, and I just started busting up laughing. I was just like, wow. And it was like one of those moments in your life like you don't ever forget. It's like, this is really freeing. So I swam back. You know, I did something really just, for me it was out of character.
Big step in the fountain.
Oh yes. I went from toe to whole body. Yeah. So I came out of the lake and I did the same thing, and I jumped right back in the lake, with all my clothes on. I did it a third time, and it was really funny because this is poor grandmother. She was on this boat with her grandson, and her grandson was maybe 6 or 7 years old. He was watching the whole thing, and I broke through the water the third time, and I hear this little pipsqueak voice behind me. Grandma, can I do that too? I said, no, you're gonna get in trouble. I was like, dude, that grandma was so me. That'd be so me. It's like, and she's like, and you could hear the little voice, but it looks like so much fun. He's doing it. I'm like, whoops. So if I was going to do it a fourth time. I was like, I better go back upstairs, go back to the room. And I walked back, I had no towel with me. I was just sopping wet with like all my clothes, my shorts, sweatshirt and everything. People were coming out of their counseling sessions. They'd come in and they were like, dude, man, what happened to you? I'm wet. They're like, wow, that lake does smell pretty bad, doesn't it? And that's when I realized at that very moment, I was like, I just had my second baptism. Because all I did was, in my own mind, I was like, it wasn't even planned. I just wanted to do something that was way out of whack for me. And so the next day, when I was sitting in a small group, Steve Morrison looked at me and he's like, because I'd been telling him that I was thinking about jumping in a lake. I was like, I told him that I said, if I do something, I need to do something to break through all this performance trap stuff. If I do something, I could see myself jumping into the lake. So he sees me the next morning, and he could tell like there was a huge breakthrough the previous night or the previous day. He looked at me, he's like, "You jumped in the lake, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I did." And he just gave me a huge high five and gave me a big hug. There was another counselor there, and he's like, "I saw you were wet with clothes. You jumped in the lake, didn't you?" I was like, "Yeah," and he just gave me this huge hug. And I remember I came back home, and it was actually a month later. Jackson had emailed my friend Jackie Wong, now Jackie Yi, and Jackie forwarded the email to me and said, "I think you should be the one speaking." And so I gave this talk that I think, Barrett, that's probably when you heard the talk for the first time. Yeah. And it was actually on leadership, but the core of leadership was similar to what we talked about missional living, is that if we don't believe, not know or understand, if we simply don't believe that we have inherent value, we're loved by God, you can't be a leader. Just can't. You can lead, but then you're leading out of your own strength, and by then you're just going to get burned out. Yeah. And I decided right then and there I wanted to share with a group that was dear to my heart that I didn't hear at that point 10 or 12 years earlier when I was third, fourth, and fifth year. And I was doing things out of my own strength. I did not want that group to get to the point where I got to at age 32. And so my prayer for you this weekend is like, the mistakes that I've made, I really don't want you to make those mistakes. Because what it does, you don't need to spend $2,200 to hear the gospel again. You don't need to go and find out all these unhealthy habits that you've been developing when it could have quickly been not so much cured or healed, but it could have been refounded with just basic truth and then living off that truth. And I think what was really frustrating for me was I spent all this time in church communities, missional groups, whatever, and we talk about strategy. I mean, that's all really good and stuff, but at the base of it was like, there was no Jesus talk, you know? There was nothing about having an inherent value. And when I looked through scripture and I started breaking it down, I was thinking, that's when I decided, like, okay, if there's one thing I will always talk to groups about, it will always be this one message, because I never want anybody to have to go through what I went through. So that's my lake story. And the funniest thing is when you jump in the water and you have, because that lake was filled with fish. It was really weird, like, they have the fish like nibble at you the entire time, and so nibble on the back of your neck, whatever. But if you do, if you ever get the opportunity to, whether you have an issue with core beliefs or not, I strongly, highly recommend that you go to that retreat. Highly recommend it. In fact, my wife and I, we've committed to giving $100 each month as a scholarship for anybody who has trouble paying for it, because it is expensive. And we've also committed to giving airline miles to people who can't afford a flight, just because I feel it's that important. Yeah, that retreat and that truth has got me through the last 4 years. And I highly doubt that a lot of you will have the situations that I've gone through, but that truth will carry you through really dark times. Because if you believe that God's there for you, if you really believe that you're loved, the circumstances don't matter. So anyways, that's the lake story, and a long story short, or short story long, excuse me.
Oh, thank you.
For
So
sharing.
much. Now Wesley will lead us into worship.